Are you filled with feelings of self-doubt? Do you find yourself prone to minimizing massive dilemmas, or for allowing the smallest problems to get blown completely out of proportion? At the Pierce Institute, our patent-pending Somnasculpt technology provides safe and effective dream therapy while you rest in the comfort of our flagship clinic. Located right next to the secondary overflow parking lot at the University Medical Centre. Somnasculpt, we'll make your dreams come true.
This conference presentation investigates the phenomenology of time perception in 2019 video game Superliminal and the relationship of the latter to the Japanese philosophical notion of Ma. Superliminal is a first-person perspective video game puzzle combining gameplay elements of force perspective, optical illusions, and trompe l'oeil. The player character is a dream therapy program patient who has become trapped in a recurring dream cycle, waking up from one dream into another endlessly. With this inquiry, I compare the multifold temporal experience prompted by the video game to the philosophical notion of Ma, a word that stands for pause, gap, or emptiness in the Japanese tradition. Ma can be articulated from a Western philosophical perspective as a Deleuzian rhizome or intermezzo, dispersing rigid Cartesian dichotomies and discarding the notion of temporal uniformity. Ma is a concept which collapses disjunctions in space-time relationship and transcends any definition of space-time intervals. A notion closely relating to the philosophical school of Kyoto and the predicament of one of its main scholars, Kitaro Nishida. A qualitative content analysis from first-hand experience of gameplay will accompany my scrutiny of salient spatio-temporal features in the various phases of the game. Examination of gameplay and design gestures, control and direction, and of the spatial and sonic setting. The objective of this inquiry is to evaluate a phenomenology of time and the intertwined spatio-temporal characteristics in the game, temporal swarms, loopholes, cycles, whirlpools, magnification and diminution, frozen instance of pinned time, the Bachelardian memento, and the game's eventual denial of temporal flow, which may stand together with quantum theory's notion of temporal error. I question whether and how the temporal characteristics provoked by the video game Superliminal relate to the concept of Ma, to spatio-temporal in-betweenness, to borderline formal temporal consciousness. In the dreamlike setting of Superliminal, how does temporal perception correlate with the construction of time, integral, mechanical, cyclical, synchronous, and asynchronous, that operates in the domain of so-called reality, which is constructed with calendars, recurrence, and chronologies, and we mix up our social contract and collective obligations? Lastly, I investigated how the various temporal qualities, ambiguities, and gaps in temporal continuity suggested by the video game Superliminal and the philosophical notion of Ma intersect with the Western philosophical phenomenology such as Husserl's notion of retention and protension, the perception of a present just passed or yet to be, and the assumed tripartite structure of time. Before proceeding into details of the game Superliminal, I should specify that my experience of gameplay refers to the version for Macintosh operating system, using a Sony DualShock 4 wireless controller. At the start of the game, a robotic voiceover explains the current circumstances. You are already in a dream, but your experience is part of a program that you have signed up for. The goal of this dream therapy is to refresh your weary mental state, that the activities that you are asked to engage in are designed to advance your exploration of the dream environment and help recondition your mental state before you wake up. Superliminal proposes recurrent scenarios, corridors, rooms of various sizes, objects that frequently reappear with modified size and color. One of the main features of the game is your ability to define the size of the object by grabbing and releasing them at various distances from your current position. For example, an object may appear small at distance or larger up close, and this will determine their final size. Thus you can enlarge or miniaturize an object at will, constrained only by the size of the space you are situated in. These objects and the ability to resize them is often essential to progressing through the various phases of the game. Here is an example of gameplay to elucidate the matter of the game's temporality and the specific relationship with the Japanese philosophical concept of Ma. From the beginning, you travel through a series of corridors and empty rooms. Some doors giving access to the various rooms are shut and can be opened only by positioning heavy objects over large square yellow buttons embedded in the floor. You enter a room with a broken window that faces an adjacent building with a room at a different level which has its own shattered window. From a distance you can see a yellow button on the floor of the room in the nearby building. From another window you can also see a small colored cube placed in another room. You grab the cube by pointing at it, shift it to your current room, resize it, place the cube on a yellow button on the floor of the other room, opens the next door. Later, in one of the subsequent rooms, there are 2 yellow buttons on the floor and no object available to trigger them. You soon realize that the exit sign, a recurring object positioned over the next target's door, can be removed. By enlarging the sign almost to the size of the room and placing it over the yellow buttons, you can press both buttons, opening the door to the next room. Here I make several observations. The game setting itself establishes that the definition of reality will be challenged, that the player may be in a condition of lucid dreams or other boundary sleep states such as hypnagogia, the transitional state from wakefulness to sleep, or hypnopompia, the transition from sleep to wakefulness. However, the setting prompts further evaluation by asking the player to imagine and embody the definition of reality, a space where objects, such as those in the room of the adjacent building, may be moved at a distance without our physically moving from our current position where we stand in a sort of non-space or a liminal space, where every object exists simultaneously in multiple alternative spaces. But an object that can be taken on any dimension is a non-object, or else it is an all-possible object and blurs fundamental characteristics define a thing as such: size, weight, appearance. When a 1,000-inch cube can be resized instantly and moved as easy as a cube of only a few inches in dimension, our assumptions about the uniformity of mass and weight must be questioned. We wonder whether this object consists of every possible dimension, or if the space itself is dimensionless, a gap, a spatio-temporal emptiness. In Japanese philosophical tradition, Ma is a word that stands for pause, gap, or emptiness. In discussing the matter, contemporary architect Isozaki Arata argues that while the Cartesian duality of space-time, rooted in a homogeneous and infinite continuum, is the basis of modern philosophical thought in the West, in Japan space and time are conceived as omnipresent and analogous. Rather than being separate from each other, space and time relate. Thus space is perceived as identical with the events or phenomena occurring in it, that this space is recognized only in its relation to time flow. Furthermore, the concept of Ma relates closely to the philosophical school of Kyoto and the predicament of one of its main scholars, the philosopher Kitaro Nishida. Nishida's thinking rests at the intersection of Eastern and Western philosophical traditions. The Japanese scholar addresses the understanding of phenomenological reality, arguing that the distinction between objective and subjective world can be reconciled only within the metaphysical and a temporal space of what he calls intuitive knowledge. The latter is the place where the sensuous world, not yet conceptualized, and the concept of the world, no longer sensed but abstracted, are both encountered. It is this space in between object and subject that is the only place of phenomenological reality, according to Nishida. This is where the in-betweenness of Ma resides. Specifically, what Nishida calls intuitive knowledge develops along a path that can foresee a knowledge vector in advance. Experiential time and pensive time collide in an intuitive act of thought. The Japanese philosophers suggest that the continuity of sensory experience sustains the continuity of consciousness itself. Juxtapose here the Western philosophical stance of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, the rhizomatic, the non-hierarchical construction of knowledge, the space of the mind. Space experienced through the senses, space imagined, space constructed, perspectivized, space regulated by habits and habitus, space eventually denied, a denial that opened crevices into alternative modality of perception, the liminal, the gap, the in-betweenness of the Japanese philosophical Ma. What Deleuze and Guattari refer to as a rhizome symbolizes a non-linear associative mode of thinking, The terms rhizome and rhizomatic describe theory and research that allows for multiple, non-hierarchical entry and exit point data representation and interpretation. Much as with the rhizome, the concept of Ma can be seen as a system of free association, allowing multiple entry and exit points in a non-linear reflective space. Returning to my experience of Superliminal after having ventured into philosophical aspects related to Ma, in-betweenness, rhizome, and liminality, I can now trace further connection with the above phenomenological tangle in a final example of a gameplay, and this will bring me to conclude this presentation on the game and its perceptual features. At some point during exploration of the environment, a voiceover from one of the doctors overseeing your dream therapy reveals that you are unable to wake up and that the dream will reset and repeat endlessly. As a character in the game, you begin to experience loopholes and cycles where the same situation occurs repeatedly but with variation in space and the object containing it, leading to different outcomes based on your interplay with the environment. You wake up many times in a bedroom which looks nearly the same but with subtle differences that become more apparent. A painting on the wall has an altered subject. The corridor outside the room has a different number of doors in the wall. Various other objects may appear, disappear with each cycle, etc. The experience seems to repeat endlessly, trapping you in a claustrophobic and seemingly meaningless loophole. Now I bring into focus a final phenomenological aspect related to the tripartite structure of time, past, present, and future. The German philosopher Edmund Husserl has extensively explored the human perception of temporality. In the phenomenology of internal time consciousness, he notices that the duration of sensations and the sensation of duration are different, and it is the same with the sensation. The succession of sensation and the sensation of succession are not the same. Here, Husserl is elaborating on American psychologist William James' late 19th century definition of specious present, as the duration of time which one's conscious perceptions are in the present. As a further amplification of this concept, in Phenomenology of Perception, French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty speaks of protension and retention, following Husserlian terminology. A present that is the only tangible moment of the perceptual field. A present is elongated and flows between faded boundaries of the recent past, retention, and the future yet to come, protension. But also a present in which we are time, and which we conceive before we conceive its part, consciousness that unfolds and constitutes time. The experience of time superliminal is cyclical, seeming to deny any form of past, present, or future. The game unfolds in an instance of time pinned to a non-dimensional point in space, echoing the four-dimensional space-time of quantum physics, the notion of Ma, the rhizome, liminal emptiness. If consciousness defined by a specious present moment, regardless of its durations, and by reconstructions of past events and premonition of future events, akin to Nishida's intuitive knowledge, then a game constructed an envelope in a whirlpool of liminal time paradoxically should not even exist. What makes the game real, perhaps, is only our personal reconstruction of reality, dreams, bodily experience, our environment, its physical boundaries, and its laws. But what if the game is played without reference to my being part of a given habitus? What if the player is unfamiliar with a social setting that allows me as a participant from a specific sociocultural context to distinguish reality from a dreamlike gameplay experience? And what if these distinctions are boundaries, reality, dream, somatic experience, space, time, are themselves constructed externally and embodied internally? Answer with this question will require more than this essay can provide. So, alas, this presentation concludes with an awareness of having generated more questions than answers, quoting one of my favorite Czech philosophers, William Flusser, even when these questions occasionally dress themselves up as answers. My exploration of the game Superliminal in its connection with the notion of Ma, the Deleuzian rhizome, and Husserl's phenomenology of time perception hopefully will spark further critical discourse on human perception, the sensorium, and the definition of spatial reality and par contra liminal space.